The courthouse in Fairfax County, Virginia, was unusually tense for a Thursday morning. Journalists were waiting quietly in the hallway. Courtroom 4B had been cleared of unrelated hearings and filled with lawyers, social workers, and state-appointed child advocates. A custody hearing doesn't usually attract this kind of attention, but this one was different. Very different. 8-year-old Maya Colton stepped hesitantly into the room, clutching a leather leash in her left hand. At the end of it walked Shadow, a large, weathered German shepherd with calm eyes and gray creeping into his muzzle. The bailiff gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Shadow was cleared by the court. He wasn't just a pet, he was a certified, emotional support animal, retired from the K-9 unit and now trained to help children who couldn't speak for themselves. Maya didn't speak much. In fact, she hadn't spoken at all in over 8 months. After her parents' messy divorce, custody was given to her father, Jason Colton, a decorated veteran and local businessman. But since moving in with him, Maya had changed. Her once bubbly nature had grown quiet. Her teachers raised concerns. Her therapist noted anxiety and signs of trauma. But there were no physical injuries, no clear accusations, and Maya refused to talk. Until today. She was guided to the witness box by a kind-faced court officer. Shadow moved with her, never more than half a step behind. The judge, Honorable Judith Lorne, looked at Maya gently. "Good morning, Maya," she said in a calm, measured tone. "You don't have to say anything you don't want to, but if you feel safe, we'd like to hear from you today." Maya didn't respond. She sat down slowly in the wooden chair, her small fingers tightening on Shadow's leash. Her feet dangled above the floor. Her eyes stayed focused on the table in front of her, carefully avoiding her father's cold gaze from across the room. Her mother, Lena Colton, sat at her attorney's side, eyes glassy, fingers interlocked in silent hope. The silence stretched. Shadow sat at Maya's feet, looking up at her. Then she moved. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, it was just a simple flick of her hand, barely noticeable unless you were watching closely. Her palm turned downward. Her fingers fluttered just once, a subtle, deliberate signal, and Shadow changed. In an instant, the dog rose to all fours, stiffened, and took 2 bold steps forward, planting himself directly between Maya and her father. His ears pricked, his tail dropped, his body formed a protective shield. The courtroom shifted. There was a noticeable murmur. Several people leaned in. Maya's father muttered something under his breath, then sat back in his chair, visibly annoyed. The judge frowned. Is something wrong with the dog?" she asked, glancing toward the bailiff. But the bailiff didn't move. Another man in the gallery stood slowly. It was Officer Tom Greeley, a retired K-9 handler now consulting for Child Protective Services. He didn't take his eyes off Shadow as he addressed the judge. "Your Honor," he said cautiously. "That was a distress signal. That little girl just told the dog she's scared." A ripple of quiet gasps swept the room. The judge raised a hand. Silence in the court, please. Maya didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't even blink. She just reached out and touched Shadow's back gently. The German shepherd didn't move. His eyes were locked on her father, his posture unmoving. The judge turned to the bailiff. "Remove Mr. Colton from the courtroom," she said, immediately. Her order cut through the room like a razor. Jason Colton stood up and began protesting, but Shadow growled low and menacing. 2 deputies moved in quickly. As Maya's father was escorted out, the room remained utterly still. Maya had finally spoken. She just hadn't used words. Long before the courtroom gasped. Before Shadow ever stepped paw into that courthouse, Maya Colton had already learned one cruel truth. Silence kept her safe. It hadn't always been that way. Before the divorce, Maya had been a curious, giggly girl who loved to build cardboard castles and ask questions faster than her parents could answer them. But the split had cracked something deep. Her father had fought hard for full custody. With his military background and clean-cut public image, the judge had initially seen him as the more stable parent. Lena Colton, reeling from post-divorce financial struggles, had no choice but to accept the arrangement. Maya was 5 when she first moved into her father's new house, clean, orderly, cold. At first, things had been quiet. Then the rules came. Then the punishments. Then the silence. She wasn't allowed to leave her room after 8 p.m. She had to eat without speaking unless spoken to. A misplaced toy could mean hours locked in the dark garage. Her father didn't scream. He didn't have to. His voice was like a loaded gun, controlled, lethal, final. Every mistake brought consequences. Over time, Maya learned to predict them, and eventually, she stopped reacting at all. At school, Teachers noticed the change. Her drawings became darker. She jumped when the bell rang. She flinched if someone brushed her arm too quickly. A concerned guidance counselor flagged her case and referred her to Dr. Yvonne Hale, a child trauma specialist known for a unique approach introducing animal therapy to children who couldn't speak about their trauma. That's how Maya met Shadow. At first, the big dog intimidated her. Shadow was huge, easily outweighing her by 50 pounds, and his police training had left him stoic and still. But during their second session, something shifted. Dr. Hale handed Maya a laminated card with 5 hand signals: come, stay, safe, scared, and no. Simple movements designed to let children express fear nonverbally. Maya looked at the scared signal, a downward palm flick, and asked only one question: will he listen if I don't say anything? Dr. Hale smiled. He'll listen. Harder. From then on, Shadow never left her side during sessions. When Maya had nightmares, Shadow was there. When she trembled walking past loud voices in the hallway, Shadow pressed close to her side. And when a male teacher once raised his voice, Maya gave the signal. Shadow responded like lightning, stepping in front of her with a low growl that froze the room. Her classmates were shocked. Her teacher apologized, and Maya realized, for the first time in months, that she wasn't alone. Shadow didn't just offer protection, he offered belief. She didn't need to explain herself. She didn't have to prove she was scared. One signal, one glance, and Shadow knew. But even that trust was a secret. Maya never used the signal casually. She never played with it. To her, the scared sign was sacred, a last resort. So when the custody battle reignited and the court requested she testify, Maya made a quiet deal with herself. She wouldn't say anything, not unless she had to. That morning in the courtroom, Shadow had sensed her unease from the start. His body pressed close to her chair. Maya had glanced once at her father, felt the tightening in her chest, and looked away. And then the memory flashed: cold garage floor, a locked door, her father's voice on the other side saying, "This is your fault." Her fingers twitched. She looked at Shadow, and without thinking, sent the signal. A flick, a breath, and Shadow moved. Now, as her father was removed from the courtroom and the judge called a brief recess, Maya sat completely still. Shadow pressed against her leg, anchoring her. Dr. Hale, who had been watching from the back row, slowly approached with a clipboard. She spoke. She whispered to Maya's mother. Not out loud, but she spoke. Lena clutched the seat in front of her and fought back tears. For the first time in 8 months, Maya had used her voice. And she'd done it with her hand, and a dog who knew how to listen. When the courtroom reconvened, the tension was different. Not louder, not chaotic, just tighter, like a string pulled taut across everyone's chest. The judge's voice, usually calm and deliberate, now carried the weight of something unspoken. Maya was still seated in the witness box, Shadow resting at her feet but alert. She had not moved from her position during the recess. She hadn't needed to. Shadow hadn't let her. The judge tapped her gavel once. We will resume the custody hearing of Maya Colton. The father, Jason Colton, has been temporarily removed from the courtroom pending further inquiry. Maya's court-appointed advocate stood. Your Honor, given what just occurred, I'd like to request that Maya be allowed to communicate non-verbally. Judge Lorne nodded. Granted. Maya's mother gave her a small, trembling smile from her seat. Her attorney placed a protective hand over Lena's. Across the room, a young social worker readied a clipboard, unsure if they'd need to take notes, unsure if the girl would say anything at all. Maya, the judge began again gently. Can you tell us, do you feel safe with your mother? No answer came. But Shadow looked up. Maya moved her hand ever so slightly, open palm facing down. She tapped her fingers softly against her thigh. Another signal. The judge's eyes widened. She turned to the canine specialist seated near the jury box. It was Officer Tom Greeley, the same retired canine handler who had spoken up earlier. That's the safe signal, he explained softly. She just confirmed she feels safe with her mother. Judge Lorne gave a slow, deep nod. Thank you, Maya. That's very helpful. The moment passed with reverent quiet. No one dared disrupt it. And then, for the first time since entering the courthouse that morning, Maya lifted her head and looked straight at the judge. She didn't let him lock me outside when it snowed, she said, voice like paper thin, but unmistakable. Everyone froze. It was the first verbal sentence Maya had spoken in 8 months. Her mother let out a soft gasp, hand rising to her mouth. The social worker dropped her pen. Even the bailiff, usually a statue, blinked in surprise. Judge Lorne leaned forward slowly. Maya, can you tell us more about that? Maya looked at Shadow, and the dog, bless him, gently nuzzled her elbow. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she reached out and held the dog's ear, absently stroking it for comfort. It was cold, she whispered. I forgot to fold the towels. He said I wasn't grateful, so he told me to wait outside until I remembered how lucky I was. Someone in the back of the courtroom exhaled sharply. The judge didn't interrupt. She waited. I was outside for a long time, Maya said. But Mommy came early that day. She got there before it got dark, and she brought you inside. The judge asked softly. Maya nodded. She yelled at him. She didn't even bring her coat, just ran to me. The room felt like it had been hit with a wave of heat, angry, protective heat. No one could look at Maya's small, brave face without feeling the weight of what she'd endured, and still, she sat there, steady as ever, with a dog who wouldn't leave her side. Shadow shifted slightly, placing one paw gently over her foot. She's telling the truth, Officer Greeley added after a beat. That signal back there, that wasn't theater. That dog responded exactly as trained. The judge folded her hands together, her face unreadable. Maya, you've been very brave today. Thank you for sharing that. You've helped us understand a lot. Maya looked down again, silent, but it no longer felt like fear. It felt like strength. Her voice, quiet as it was, had broken the courtroom open, not just through sound, but through silence, signals, and a dog who heard everything. For several long seconds after Maya's words, the courtroom remained completely still, like someone had pressed pause on an entire building. Even the ceiling fan above the judge's bench seemed to creak more softly. Everyone was caught between shock and awe, afraid to move in fear of breaking the spell this brave little girl had cast over the room. Shadow still hadn't sat down. His body was stiff, like he was waiting for something or guarding against it. He stood in a shield position between Maya and the courtroom's doors, and his eyes remained sharp. Every muscle in his body stayed tense, every breath silent. Judge Lorne finally turned to Maya's mother's attorney. Ms. Crane, do you have any further questions for the witness? Lena Colton's lawyer stood and nodded respectfully. I do, Your Honor, just a few. She walked slowly toward the witness box, careful not to startle either Maya or the dog. Her tone was gentle, soft, as if talking to someone curled in a nest of fear. Maya, she said, do you remember the first time you met Shadow? Maya looked down at the dog and managed a small smile. Yes. Can you tell us how he made you feel when you first saw him? Maya paused, one hand resting on Shadow's fur. I didn't want to talk to anybody, not even my mom. But he just sat there, and he didn't ask questions. He just stayed. And when you feel scared, what does Shadow do? He doesn't let anyone come close. There was something so simple and heartbreakingly honest in that answer. The entire courtroom stirred again. Maya didn't use big words or emotional dramatics, just a truth that rang through every heart in the room. The lawyer nodded. Thank you, Maya. She returned to her seat, but before Judge Lorne could speak again, the door at the back of the courtroom creaked open. A uniformed deputy leaned in and quietly handed a file to the bailiff, who approached the bench and whispered into the judge's ear. The judge's expression shifted slightly, sternness replacing her earlier softness. I've just received preliminary documentation from Child Protective Services, she said, addressing the room. Based on this morning's events, a welfare officer was dispatched to Mr. Jason Colton's residence. The room held its breath. Photos and statements have confirmed multiple red flags. A locked garage door with interior latch, a punishment chart labeled obedience log, and a journal entry from Maya's school counselor describing a sudden shift in behavior following her change in residence. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Maya didn't move. Her hands curled into the dog's fur like she was holding on to the only solid thing in the room. Judge Lorne's gavel struck the block. I am issuing an emergency suspension of custodial rights from Mr. Jason Colton, effective immediately. Full temporary custody is granted to Ms. Lena Colton, pending further review. Lena let out a loud breath that turned into a sob. She covered her mouth with her hands and looked at her daughter with eyes brimming with relief. But the judge wasn't done. I'd also like to formally commend Maya Colton for her extraordinary courage, not only for speaking today, but for finding a way to communicate when most adults would have given up. Her use of nonverbal signaling with her support animal was not only effective, it may very well have saved her life. A beat passed, then someone in the gallery began to clap, and then another, and then the entire courtroom stood not in chaos, but in recognition. For a girl who never raised her voice, Maya was now the loudest person in the room. Maya didn't smile, she didn't cry, She simply reached for Shadow and wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his fur. The courtroom may have frozen, but Maya had just begun to thaw. By the time the courtroom emptied, the story had already begun to spread. One courtroom staffer texted her husband, a young lawyer whispered it to another outside. Before Maya even left the building, someone had tweeted, a silent hand signal, a retired canine, a child speaks through her dog. You had to see it to believe it. But inside the courtroom, things hadn't slowed down. Judge Lorne called for a short recess before reviewing next steps. Meanwhile, Maya and Shadow waited in a quiet room next to the judge's chambers. The girl sat curled on a couch, Shadow's head in her lap, her fingers stroking his fur like it was the only anchor keeping her grounded. Lena sat nearby, holding back emotion. Her daughter had spoken, but more importantly she had been believed. In the courtroom, a new witness took the stand, Officer Tom Greeley, the retired canine handler, a tall man with broad shoulders and a soft voice. He had worked for 2 decades training service dogs, for law enforcement, therapy, and trauma response. He adjusted his tie and looked the judge squarely in the eyes. Your Honor, I personally trained Shadow 8 years ago. He's a dual-purpose canine, meaning he was trained in both law enforcement tracking and trauma detection. But after an injury ended his patrol career, we repurposed him for therapeutic use. The judge nodded. Go on. Shadow's most critical training came from a program called Silent Guardians, developed after several cases where abused children couldn't or wouldn't speak. We taught those kids to communicate through pre-agreed hand signals, and the dogs were trained to react, not on command, but on instinct, tied to those signals. Shadow was one of our most intuitive dogs. We used to say he could read a child's fear before they even showed it. The court listened closely as he continued. There was a case, years ago, Greeley said, glancing toward the door where Maya had exited, a girl named Leela, same age as Maya. We brought Shadow in. She wouldn't talk, not once, but when her stepfather entered the room, she gave the scared signal. Shadow immediately placed himself between them, growled, and refused to move. He paused. That signal saved her, just like it saved Maya. The judge leaned forward, voice quieter now. And you're certain the signal Maya gave today was intentional? It wasn't a coincidence. I'm absolutely certain, Greeley replied without hesitation. It was clear, clean, and perfectly executed. Dogs like Shadow don't react unless they're sure. He's been through more assessments than most officers I've trained. If he moved, it's because he knew something wasn't right. Lena wiped a tear from her cheek as she listened. It was no longer just her word or even Maya's. Now there was an expert vouching for them. A decorated dog, a trusted system outside the room. One of the deputies approached Maya with something wrapped in a soft cloth. This was Shadow's badge, he said gently. They gave it to him when he retired. We thought he should have it again. Or maybe you should. Maya looked at the small, worn silver tag in the center. K9 to 714. Shadow, it read. She clutched it in her palm and nodded once. Later, as the news vans rolled up and reporters began trying to piece together the timeline, all anyone could really agree on was this. Something rare had happened today. A courtroom had seen past noise and defense and paperwork. It had listened to a signal, to a dog, and finally, to a little girl who hadn't used her voice until now. Shadow didn't need applause or headlines. He only needed to be near Maya. But that day, as the judge cleared her throat and looked out at the court, she said something no one would forget. That dog didn't just obey, he testified. And everyone in the room knew. She was absolutely right. Asterisk in the quiet room adjacent to the courtroom. Maya sat huddled next to Shadow, the silver K9 badge still gripped tightly in her small fist. Her eyes were focused not on the people around her, not even on her mother, but on the steady rise and fall of Shadow's chest. His calm was her anchor. Lena knelt beside her, unsure of what to say. All she could do was offer presence and hope Maya felt it. For so long, she'd been watching her daughter disappear, day by day, but today, she saw something return, not all at once, but enough to breathe again. Judge Lorne, accompanied by Maya's guardian ad litem and Dr. Hale, entered the room softly. No one wanted to startle the fragile peace. Maya, the judge said gently, kneeling to her level. You've done more than anyone could have asked today, but if you're willing, there's something important we'd like to hear from you. In your own words. Maya didn't respond at first. Her thumb rubbed slowly over Shadow's badge. Then she gave a small nod. Shadow, as if understanding, rested his chin on her knee and stayed perfectly still. Dr. Hale sat beside her. You don't have to say everything, she whispered. Just what you want. Maya's voice was quiet, so quiet it could have been mistaken for a breeze, but no one missed a syllable. He said I wasn't good, that I made things hard. He got mad when I cried, so I stopped crying. The room held its breath. He told me people wouldn't believe me because I was just a kid. That mommy left because I ruined everything. Lena's hand shot to her mouth as tears poured from her eyes. I didn't want to talk to anyone because I didn't want to make it worse. But Shadow knew. She glanced down at the dog, who hadn't moved a muscle. He always knew. Even when I didn't say anything, he would just know. If I had nightmares, he'd sleep across the door. If I shook, he'd push into me. He never asked what was wrong. He just stayed. Judge Lauren's voice cracked slightly as she said, "You're very brave, Maya." Maya nodded softly, looking up for the first time. "It wasn't me, it was Shadow." "No," Lena said, kneeling now too. "It was both of you." There was a silence then, the kind that fills a room when truth is laid bare. No need for anyone to add to it. The truth had already done the work. Later that afternoon, the judge reconvened court for a final statement. The public gallery was still filled. Word had spread beyond legal circles. Educators, trauma counselors, and even local veterans had come to witness what many were now calling the trial of the whisper. Judge Lauren addressed the court. This courtroom has seen many cases, some loud, some chaotic, many tragic. But what we witnessed today was something unique. A child who had been silenced not just by fear, but by the weight of disbelief, chose a different way to speak. And when she did, she was heard clearly and completely. She turned her gaze to Maya and Shadow, sitting quietly near the front. Let this be known. When the system truly listens not just to voices, but to signals, to instincts, to courage in all its forms, we can protect the ones who need us most. Maya, your bravery has moved us. And Shadow, your loyalty reminds us what justice really looks like. Applause wasn't permitted in court, but the silence that followed spoke louder than any cheer. Outside, as cameras gathered and reporters called out questions, Maya didn't answer. She simply walked beside her mother, holding Shadow's leash in one hand and his badge in the other. For the first time in nearly a year, Maya spoke again, this time just to Shadow. "You can rest now," she whispered. But the truth was, he didn't need to. Because for the first time, Maya could stand on her own. The next morning, the courtroom doors opened once more, not to confusion or uncertainty, but to resolution. Judge Lauren had reconvened the hearing early. The Colton case had moved faster than most. There were still legal steps to follow, investigations to finish, and reports to be reviewed. But the truth had already taken root. The court no longer saw Maya as a mystery. She was a child who had screamed without raising her voice. And the world had finally heard her. Maya entered the courtroom, hand in hand with her mother. Shadow walked close to her side, ears perked, tail calm. No growling today, no tension in his steps. He walked like a soldier returning from duty, still alert, but finally at peace. Cameras weren't allowed inside the courtroom, but that didn't stop the reporters from gathering in the lobby. The case had made national headlines overnight. Social media erupted with hashtags like #ShadowTheProtector and #MayaSpoke, and organizations for child advocacy were sharing the story with urgent messages. Listen, watch, protect. Judge Lauren entered and called the court to order. Her expression today wasn't one of formality, it was one of clarity. Like someone who had witnessed something unforgettable, she looked directly at Maya. "Before we begin formalities, I want to speak plainly." Maya met her eyes without hesitation. "I've sat on this bench for nearly 20 years. I've seen a lot, too much, some days. But what happened in this courtroom yesterday reminded me why I do this job." She turned toward the attorneys and the courtroom at large. "We've spoken with CPS investigators, reviewed school counselor documentation, received testimony from therapy specialists, and gathered photographic evidence from the Colton residence. The court has found substantial, credible signs of emotional and psychological abuse." Jason Colton's attorney sat alone. The man himself was now under criminal investigation, facing potential charges for endangering a minor and unlawful confinement, effective immediately. Judge Lauren continued, "Full legal and physical custody of Maya Colton is granted to her mother, Lena Colton. All visitation rights for Jason Colton are revoked until further notice." Lena closed her eyes. Her breath shook. Maya reached for her hand. A sigh of relief rippled through the courtroom. For some, it was just another ruling. For Maya, it was her life being handed back to her. But Judge Lorne wasn't finished. This court recognizes the extraordinary role played by Shadow in alerting us to Maya's distress. His response was not emotional, it was trained, intelligent, and exact. He is, in every legal and moral sense, a protector. She reached beneath the bench and pulled out a sealed document. Today, I am signing an honorary certificate recognizing Shadow as a guardian of the court, first of his kind. In this district, Officer Greeley, seated in the front row, stood and applauded softly. Others followed, quietly, respectfully. Maya's eyes lit up not because of the title, but because someone had acknowledged what she already knew. Shadow hadn't just helped her survive, he had helped her be believed. As the judge rose to adjourn, she paused once more. Maya, she said, voice warm, do you want to say anything? Maya stood. Her feet barely reached the edge of the floor, but her voice didn't shake. Thank you for listening when I didn't know how to talk. Then she turned to Shadow, who had been watching her the whole time. We did it outside. When the doors opened, a soft summer breeze greeted them. Maya blinked at the sunlight, her free hand reaching down to touch Shadow's collar. He wagged his tail once, as if sensing the shift. For the first time in over a year, she didn't feel watched. She felt free. And freedom, she learned, doesn't always come from fighting. Sometimes, it comes from being heard. Weeks passed since the courtroom drama that had captured the nation's attention. The legal battles had quieted, but for Maya Colton, a different kind of journey was just beginning. One of healing, hope, and new life. Maya's world was no longer defined by silence or fear. With her mother, Lena, and Shadow by her side, she was thriving in ways no one had dared to imagine a year ago. Therapy sessions were filled with laughter. School was a place of friendship and curiosity, not dread. And Shadow, ever vigilant, was now not only her protector, but her best friend. The bond they shared had deepened beyond words and signals. Shadow's once serious demeanor softened, responding to Maya's growing confidence with gentle nudges and playful tail wags. They were inseparable. Together, they began volunteering at the local children's trauma center, where Maya shared her story not with fear, but with courage. Her favorite moment was when she stood before a group of kids, many of whom struggled to find their own voices, and spoke about the power of communication beyond words. Sometimes, Maya would say, you don't have to talk. You can use your hands, your heart, or even a dog who listens, and someone will hear you. Shadow lay quietly at her feet during these talks, his presence a living testament to their journey. They had become a symbol of hope not just for the children they helped but for the whole community. The media followed their story closely. Articles hailed Shadow as the silent guardian, and Maya as the girl who taught a courtroom to listen without words. Invitations poured in for public speaking events, school visits, and even national child advocacy campaigns. But Maya and Lena chose their moments carefully, prioritizing Maya's well-being over fame. One evening, as the sun set over their quiet neighborhood, Maya sat on the porch steps, Shadow resting his head on her lap. She traced the worn edges of his canine badge, a tangible reminder of the courage that had brought them here. Do you remember that day in court? Maya whispered softly. Shadow's eyes met hers, steady and reassuring. I was scared, but you knew. You always knew. Shadow gave a low, contented sigh. Maya smiled. I don't have to be scared anymore. Lena joined them, wrapping an arm around Maya's shoulders. You're brave, sweetheart, and you're not alone. Together, they watched the sky change colors, a new beginning painted in pinks and oranges. Maya had found her voice. It wasn't loud or boisterous. It was quiet, steady, and sometimes spoken through the touch of a hand or the watchful eyes of a loyal dog. But it was enough. Because when the world truly listens, silence speaks volumes. Shadow, once a soldier of the streets, had become a beacon of healing, and Maya, the girl who used a silent signal, had forever changed the way a courtroom and a country heard the cries of those who cannot speak. Their story, whispered through time, reminds us all, sometimes the strongest voices are the quietest.